Good evening, everyone. Great to see you all here. Great that you've come out for this very important issue. It's a very important set of issues. Now, while you've been getting your drinks, you'll have been seeing that there's been some non-trivial trivia questions up here on the board, and I'm going to go through them. So, I don't know if have you all answered the questions? No? Okay. Show of hands for this first question here. Which of these are being experienced on coral atolls in the Pacific now? Is it A, coastal erosion, etc., B, drought, or C, both A and B? So A, B, or C? Yay! Smart audience. Next one. So far, high islands like Hawaii and Samoa are free of impacts from climate change. True? Anyone? False? You see, very smart audience, hey! Because of climate change, some Pacific communities will start abandoning their islands from about 2014. Anyone? 2030? 2050? The answer is A. People already have been abandoning their islands because of climate change. They'll continue to this year and next year and all these years in the future. So welcome to SciCafe and Islands at the Edge. I'm Jenny Newell and I'm a curator here in the Pacific at the museum. And I've been studying the history and anthropology of people's relationship with the environment in the Pacific for some time. And I'm particularly interested in the cultural impacts of climate change. And I'm here with my lovely co-presenter Tina, who's with the Marshallese Educational Initiative. Did I get that right? I did. Good. And Tina and I have been working all sorts of things together for the last few years and we'll continue to work together for the coming years. So lots of great projects. I'm wanting to give you a bit of an introduction to the Pacific, give you a broad brush view of some of the key things about the Pacific, about the people and the places in the Pacific, particularly its diversity, as well as a lot of the things that the islands hold in common. And this is to give you some backdrop for then the specific case of the Marshall Islands that Tina's going to be painting for you. The Pacific Ocean takes up 1/3 of the globe. It's the largest ocean on the Earth, and it takes about 14 hours to fly across it. How many of you have been to the Pacific? Have you visited Hawaii, other islands? A lot of you, so you're already, many of you, familiar with the topographies and the communities that you find within the Pacific. So there's 25,000 islands within the Pacific, roughly, and about 10,000 of those are inhabited. And they range from high islands, like Hawaii, a volcanic island. We're also going to be talking about atolls, coral atolls, such as Kiribati. A coral atoll is formed when a coral reef grows sufficiently to poke out the top of the ocean, and then people are able to inhabit it and start to grow things upon it. There are many atolls within the Pacific, and the Marshall Islands is one of them. And so the Marshall Islands will be the focus for this evening. I have a picture here of Majuro. This is the capital of the Marshall Islands, of the Republic of the Marshall Islands. And you can see the kinds of topography that people are dealing with. So we also have the Carteret Islands. I wanted to mention the Carteret Islands because it's from here that some of the people who are being talked about as the first climate change refugees are from. And although most Pacific Islanders would prefer we didn't use that phrase, climate change refugees, because they prefer a term that would help them to feel like they have more dignity, perhaps climate change migrants. It's a way that the global world is thinking about them. So in the Carteret Islands, people are having a lot of difficulty finding enough security for their families. They're frequently being overwashed by high tides, by king tides, by storm surges. And there's also saltwater intrusion coming up through this coral substrate and damaging taro crops. It's quite hard for people to sustain themselves. A lot of their staple foods are becoming untenable. So when one of the slightly random ships comes from Papua New Guinea, a supply ship will come from time to time during a year, sort of on a very flexible schedule. People then have to try and decide whether they're going to hop on that boat with their families and go back to Bougainville, which is within Papua New Guinea, and try and establish themselves there in a place where they will have no land of their own and where the lifestyle is very different. It's a former civil war area and a very different kind of place. These are the sorts of things that are starting to happen within the Pacific, and they'll be happening increasingly. back to the Pacific as a whole, I just wanted to make a few quick points about the cultural diversity of the Pacific. It's the most culturally diverse region in the world, and within those 10,000 inhabited islands, there are very many different ways of living. In the highlands of Papua New Guinea, there's incredible language diversity. So for instance, in Papua New Guinea, where there's a population of 4 million, there are 750 languages spoken. That falls within 60 main families of language. So it's incredible richness and diversity within the Pacific. You have people living in very many different environments within the Pacific, so from urban centres like Auckland or Honolulu or Papeete or Suva, and also people who are living in hamlets and villages and more self-sufficient kinds of ways. Pacific Islanders are people of the sea in a very real way. It's one of those things that you can say is not quite a constant, but a really common feature of Pacific Island cultures is this great connection to the sea and a sense of having a history of having travelled and being voyagers. But there's a very long tradition of voyaging, not just for trading, but also just for settling very, very far-flung islands. So the Pacific Islands were settled in these great migrations by voyaging canoes, which took place over vast distances, unimaginable distances of just open sea, where it's the last part of the world to have been settled because it's the most incredibly difficult environment to travel across. But from about 50,000 BC, people started to move out from Southeast Asia to Australia, Papua New Guinea and the Solomons, and then more recently, 2000 BC onwards, there were other flows of migration across to the east from Southeast Asia and coming across to Micronesia, Melanesia and Polynesia. And in each place, people would stop for a while and move on, but take many parts of their culture, as well as their kit of voyaging plants and animals to take with them to establish themselves on whichever new island they might find. One of the other constants within the Pacific is the importance of ancestors. These are some moai, some ancestor figures in Rapa Nui, Easter Island. Ancestors have always been a crucially important part of Pacific Island cultures and the way of, just as a way of life, of always honouring one's ancestors and keeping them as a vibrant and active part of Pacific Island, as part of their everyday lives, and particularly ceremonial lives. Also within the material culture of people within the Pacific, you can see, such as the things that are here in the museum, many ways that people incorporate aspects of the natural world into the things that they're doing. So this is a canoe prow. Things like fish traps are very specific to the particular type of fish that someone's going to be catching from a particular place, particular time of year, particular kind of fish at its particular life stage, and so everything is really, really well known, and that kind of intimate knowledge has been within those communities for a very long time. And there's also great traditions of navigation, which, as Tina will attest, the Marshall Islanders are seen to be the pinnacle of. They're the greatest navigators in the world. Yes? Yes. Absolutely.
Most definitely.
And this is the Marshall Islands navigational chart. Often people who come to the Pacific Hall on the third floor here say this is their favourite object, and I can see why. It's wonderful. This is a chart of the Marshall Islands and the currents and the different ways to find your way to the different islands. The islands are shown with shells. And it's this kind of object that was used to teach young navigators to read their landscape and to understand it fully. And it's that kind of knowledge, that detailed, intimate knowledge, to be able to understand exactly how their marine environment was working, to be able to read the surface of the ocean and see where the currents are intersecting, and to see the cloud formations in the distance, and to be able to smell the scent of land coming off from the distance. All these details are the sorts of things that have meant that Pacific Islanders realised quite early on that their environment was changing. One of my friends who's a Samoan was saying that, we in the Pacific, we've been talking about climate change for the longest. We've known about climate change for ages. And I guess it's that sense, who knows if that's true or not, but there's that sense that that they're more in touch with their environment, therefore they're able to understand that there are changes happening. And I guess since about the 1980s, people have been recognising that there's things that have been changing, that the temperature's getting higher, the ocean's been encroaching much more. There's been all sorts of changes around them. And one of the things that's been happening is atolls such as Tuvalu have been increasingly being overwashed by higher tides, by storm surges and so on. High islands are also having problems, but this is certainly something which is increasingly being noticed in the atolls. So just preface this by saying I'm not a climate change scientist. I know many of you out in the audience are, and so don't be too concerned by the things I'm saying here. This is my understanding of how things are working, but you'll be able to correct me in the question time if I've managed to get things wrong. There's rising seas within the Pacific, and the global sea level rate is rising at double what was predicted, what was estimated in 2007, and it has a larger impact on atolls, particularly because of the low topography. So a small increment means more of the land gets overwashed. And a rising sea level causes things ranging from coastal erosion and larger flood areas and saltwater inundation into groundwater and into crops as well, and also coral dieback, so a wide range of impacts. This also has the kind of impact that means that people are losing their sacred sites, some of their cemeteries where family and more distant ancestors are buried. So people having to try and make decisions about what to do about that. And also there's things that governments are doing. So some governments are deciding to relocate their coastal communities inland. This has been happening in Fiji a bit, and you can sort of wonder whether they've been consulting with their communities very much particularly about the type of housing they might put in for their communities. But anyway, this is what's been happening in Fiji. Some of the other crucial things happening in the Pacific are coral bleaching, which is occurring because oceans are becoming more acidic and also warmer. So there's some of those problems with coral reefs dying and being then washed away, being eroded. Also more frequent droughts. So you have problems with too much water and not enough water, many more extremes, and more intense storms. This is some examples of images from Cyclone Evan in Samoa, 2012. And of course, cyclones have terrible impacts on, you get loss of life and you get loss of property and loss of food sources. So storms are intensifying partly because the surface ocean temperature is increasing, and also because there's higher humidity. So both these things are things that are being caused by climate change, and they sort of load the dice so that you're more likely to get an intense storm. More intense storms cause loss of life and property, but also more coastal erosion and flooding and damage to reefs. So it's a pretty grim picture, really, but Pacific Islanders are very resilient, and there's a sense that a large part of their resilience resides in cultural things like the fact that they've got really strong communities. They have, I think it's a fairly fair generalisation to say that there's very strong family groups, and that people are also very well connected within their villages, and they support each other to a very close degree. There's a lot of support for people, practically as well as emotionally. The things they say about themselves in terms of their resilience are things like, well, we're very adaptable. We've always had to adapt. Our environment's always changing, and there's always, one of my friends said, well, the sea's always been rising up to get us. This is just its latest incarnation. So I guess there's a sense that they're an adaptable people and they're going to take this challenge head on. I think one of the things that Pacific Islanders have often felt is that they travel well, that there's a capacity to be good migrators, that they are able to move out to other communities around the world. People are quite proud of the fact that as islanders they can move, but that's kind of like it's a migration of a particular sort. There's still a homeland, and people keep in touch with home and family very closely through Facebook and email and Facebook mostly. It's Facebook only. And there's lots of travelling back and forth. People are often going home for for family ceremonies, and there's a sense that you never really leave, that you're still a very active part of your homeland and everyone back there, and the sense of a permanent moving away and a permanent loss of that homeland is something completely different, and that's probably something that's probably a bit inconceivable, I think, for many people. Pacific Islanders aren't just people of the sea, they are also very much people of the land, and there's very, very deep roots with one's particular piece of land, and one's ancestors have always been there, and it gives a lot of one's sense of identity. I was speaking to a Tahitian senator, and he said, I was asking about climate change and how people are thinking about that and whether they're thinking about moving, and he said, well, but no, the land is our mother, and you have to look after your mother, and you can't just leave her. And other people have said things like, someone who was speaking to the anthropologist Peter Rudyard-Gould in the Marshall Islands, they were saying to him, well, if you lose your land, you've lost everything. Land is our survival. And it's a bit like imagining someone in the West having their house burned down, getting fired from their job, and losing their savings account all at once. Kathy Jetnor-Kishner is an activist and a poet in the Marshall Islands, and she spoke at the UN last week. But a while back she wrote another one called Tell Them, and I recommend you listen to it on YouTube. The very last line of it is, tell them we don't want to leave our lands. We've never wanted to leave. We are nothing without our islands. One of the things that someone in the trailer from There Once Was an Island, which we had on the website as one of the resources for tonight, said, as he was thinking about taking his family away from Taku Island in the Carterets, he said, I just don't think you can take culture to other lands. And I guess there's a sense that some people feel that if they do have to leave their islands, what will they become? How do they hold on to their culture? And I think people are going to be approaching it in many, many different ways. It's because everyone's going to have their own take on that and their own approach to that, but it's something that many people are feeling is quite an imponderable question. It's probably maybe too early to even be thinking about that. It's quite hard to think about what happens to your culture when the land in which it's rooted is no longer there. People in the Pacific have been bearing the brunt of the Anthropocene, the greenhouse gases that the industrialised and post-industrialised nations have been emitting since the industrial era began, since the Industrial Revolution. And it's one of those continuations of the injustices of this world that it's the Pacific Islanders who've contributed almost nothing. I think it's 0.03% of those emissions are the ones who are having to cope with these terrible impacts now. And what's been really humbling for me as I've been talking to people and researching what's happening in the Pacific is the extent to which anyone I speak to there, or any of the YouTube videos I watch, or any of the interviews I see, people aren't casting themselves in the role of victims. They're being very much more, well, they're being proactive, they're saying, we need to do this, we want to be heard, and we want the rest of the world to realise what's going on here and to try and curb their emissions, try and stop consuming so much, try and consider the impacts of their actions upon us. And again, in the Marshall Islands, there's many people in the Marshall Islands who are calling for giving up the trappings of globalization, the things that have been making life sort of more comfortable and that have been popular, the things from America such as tin food and outboard motors, and to return to things that are traditional instead, so to return to traditional lives. And there's a sense that there's even some sense of self-blame for climate change, that they've given up their traditional ways and have moved towards American ways, and that it's not surprising this is what's now happening. I think it's very salutary listening to Pacific Islanders, and we have a lot to learn from Pacific Islanders. And I can recommend spending some time on YouTube and Flickr and just contemplating the kinds of challenges that people are facing there, and what we might do to, face up to our responsibilities a little bit, and also think about the sorts of losses that are occurring there, which will be occurring more frequently, going to be increasing for the rest of us and the rest of the world. The sorts of things that, the losses of home and places of significance, and the small things that we love. I think we have a lot to learn from Pacific Islanders, and I think we all need to think about ways of finding our own small corner to fight. So on that note, I would like to pass over to Tina to introduce us to the Marshall Islands. Thanks.
Hello to you all from the Marshall Islands. My name is Tina Stege, and I am from the Marshall Islands. I've lived in New York for about 6 years now, but I travel home as often as I can. And when I do, this is what I see outside my airplane window when the pilot says, "Prepare for landing." And new arrivals to the Marshalls often get kind of nervous when you're going in for a landing. They think, how could a plane possibly land on such a small strip of land? It seems like you're going to land in the ocean. I have never worried. I just felt the excitement of coming home. But things are changing. More on that in a minute, but first a little orientation. Where are the Marshall Islands? We're in the northwestern Pacific, 7 degrees north of the equator, about 2,500 miles southwest of Hawaii, a 5-hour plane ride. The islands are spread over an area roughly the size of the western United States, so Texas all the way up to the Dakotas. But the total landmass of the Marshalls actually is about the size of Washington, D.C. So there's over 1,200 islands, and if you brought them all together, it would be the size of Washington, D.C., but instead they're scattered over the Pacific. So these are very small little spots of land in a very, very vast ocean. Our population stands at about 52,000 people. 72% of those people live in the urban areas of Madro, the capital, which Jenny mentioned already, but also Ibai, which is on an atoll called Kwajalein. Some of you might know it. It's a U.S. military base, actually. The rest of our people live in outer islands. The difference between urban and outer islands is pretty stark. The outer islands, it's the self-sufficient subsistence living, no running water, very little electricity type of lifestyle, fishing for your food every day. And in the urban centers, it's a much more Western, working at a job for money to buy your food and kind of lifestyle. We also have about 22,000 Marshallese who live abroad, pretty much in the United States. Only 10 of us in New York. But we have a very large community in Springdale, Arkansas. We have community in Hawaii and also in Washington State. Those are sort of the main centers. At 6 to 7 feet above sea level, our country is among the 5 most vulnerable nations on the planet Earth. They've been officially identified as such. The prediction of a 6-foot sea level rise by 2100, that's a pretty devastating outlook for my islands. And that's just sea level rise. It doesn't speak to the effects like coral bleaching, ocean acidification, and the increasing frequency and intensity of weather events such as droughts. typhoon storm surges. And in fact, we're already experiencing some of these devastating effects. You can see from this chart that tides are rising. It's actually shows monthly measurements of high tides in Madro from 93 to 2013 and steadily ticking upwards. There's really nowhere to go when the sea rises. There's not a higher place that you can go to. And in many parts of the island, there isn't some interior that you can move back from the coast to. This is one of the skinniest parts of the island, but even at the widest point, it's less than a mile across. So there was an event in 2013 where tidal flooding actually broke the cement seawall that protects this runway, and rocks and debris were washed in, and United, which comes 3 times a week and is the only airline that comes to the Marshalls, could not land until the runway was cleared of that debris. So for a while, we actually didn't have any access to the outside world except by ship. This is an atoll, actually not in the Marshalls, but in the FSM, which is a neighboring country. And I put it here because it kind of shows you how when the sea level rises, it comes at us from all points. It comes at us from the lagoon, which is inside the atoll. It comes at us from the ocean side on the exterior of the atoll. It also comes to us from beneath the ground because the water rises and it comes up through the walls and the wells and affects our groundwater as well. So the facts, as Jenny mentioned, are pretty grim, but as in any story, the facts don't capture the entire story. We have taken to heart the not drowning, but we're fighting motto. Community leaders in Rita, which is the village that I grew up in, they came together in 2010 to jumpstart a bunch of different initiatives, shoreline protection programs, water quality testing, and that initiative has become a model for community participation in other parts of Madro. And it's based on this model of community participation called Reimanlak, and Reimanlak translates as looking forward. And so there's hope, there's a will to build toward the future. People are definitely not giving up. And this Reimanlak model is also implemented in the outer islands. The outer islands, it's a basis for conservation measures. So in the Marshalls, partnerships between grassroots organizations and government are key, just as in other parts of the world, for how we're going to respond to climate change. And this is an area which we have much work remains to be done, but momentum is there. Just this month, just a couple weeks ago, the government hosted a town hall meeting to promote a national dialogue on climate change. And I put that up, I put both these things up to give you a sense of how in the Marshalls, climate change is very much the day-to-day reality. It's something that people talk about. It's a word everybody knows. It's not something that's far off in the future. It's something that is our present and we're facing now and trying to figure out how we're going to respond and deal with it. This last slide is actually my mom and my daughters, Marshallese poet Kathy Jetnil Kitchener. She has a line in the poem where she says, we deserve not just to survive, we deserve to thrive. And that's the message that I hope today I'm going to leave with you. It's a message that my mom, here with my children, is passing on as they explore the plants that grow on our family land. This land is called Tinbargan. I played there when I was a kid. And on this same day, they went out to the ocean side and went clamming. And that's a memory I have of something I did with my grandmother when I was a little kid. And I really hope that one day I'll be able to do it with my grandchildren. One day. Thank you very much. Komo tara.